Greetings, fellow ghouls, and thanks for stopping by on this stormy evening. Quite a rainy season we're having so far, wouldn't you say? No complaints here. I myself am quite partial to the precipitation. After all, there's no more perfect backdrop for a true scary story. Come, dry yourself by the fire, and I'll tell you the tale of the haunted house. Growing up, it was common knowledge that my aunt and uncle lived in a haunted house. They lived a few states away, and whenever my family went to go visit, usually in the summer, one of us would always have or hear about some strange new paranormal occurrence. I'll share a few of them with you now. The house itself looked like a stereotypical haunted house. It was a big, old, colonial-style home that was, get this, across the street from a spooky old church. It was a quiet street with many trees on either side. The house sat just off the road with a big yard on the side and a dense tree line just beyond it. One summer, my family visited my aunt and uncle for a few days and stayed in their house. I was maybe 10 or 11 at the time, and this was the first paranormal experience I ever had personally. The first full day we were there, my mom, my dad, my aunt and uncle decided to go to town to pick up some groceries from a farmer's market. They wanted to go before lunch, so we'd have stuff to eat for the rest of the day. Because they were leaving on the earlier side, though, they told me I could stay back at the house, take it easy, and watch some TV while they went into town. That sounded good to me, so I got comfortable on the couch and started surfing the channels. Everyone said bye to me and assured that they'd be back within the hour. I saw them all leave, so I know for a fact I was the only one home at the time. After surfing aimlessly for a bit, I found something worth watching and decided to lie down. The way the living room was set up, with me lying down on the couch, my head was near the entryway to the living room, which itself was right next to the front door and the main stairwell leading up to the second floor of the house. I remember exactly what was on TV. It was the Band Geeks episode of SpongeBob. I had seen it before, and it was one of my favorites. I mention this only because I basically knew the episode by heart. Some people I've told have wondered if I actually fell asleep on the couch during this encounter, but I know that I didn't, because I remember the entire episode playing out. Right around the time of Squidward's first rehearsal with the band, I heard a noise upstairs. Now, it was an old house with plenty of sounds like creaks and banging pipes, occurring fairly regularly. I clocked the noise, but didn't think twice about it at the time. Then, just a few minutes later, I heard, crystal clear, someone coming down the stairs. One heavy footstep after another, walking down the stairs at a normal pace. I bolted upright on the couch. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and then just stopped. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I turned around slowly, looking back towards the entrance to the living room and at the front door of the house where the stairs began. There was nobody there. I slowly got up from the couch and poked my head around the corner, looking up the stairway. Once again, no one. I sprinted out of the living room, darting to the back side of the house, where the kitchen led to the back door. I burst through the door and ran all the way out into the backyard. I waited there until my parents and aunt and uncle got home from the farmer's market. When they did, about 20 minutes later, I told them what had happened. My uncle didn't seem shaken. "Yeah, that happens sometimes," he said nonchalantly. "We hear footsteps pretty often." Maybe a year or two later, my aunt and uncle had a baby. That summer when we went to go visit, we got to meet her. Emma was her name. By the time we came to visit, she was already a few months old. She liked to eat in her high chair at the time, and she had developed this funny little behavior of sharing her food with you whenever she ate. For instance, if she had 10 little pieces of cut-up fruit in front of her and you were sitting nearby, she would pick one piece up and hold it out to you, arm outstretched, until you took it. People would laugh whenever she did this, and I think the positive reinforcement just made her do it even more. One day we were all at the house, having a sort of happy hour and preparing for dinner. I remember it was just starting to get dark outside. We were all kind of moving between the living room and the kitchen, eating hors d'oeuvres, cooking, and just hanging out. Emma was in her high chair, placed basically in the middle of the kitchen. To her left was the main counter area and kitchen island, and to her right was a door down into the basement. The door was open, but the light was off in the basement, so it was just a void of darkness. The house had a very spooky, unfinished basement, with creaky wooden steps leading down into a messy room full of old junk. My aunt cut up some food for Emma and put it on the tray of her high chair. She was always pretty good about eating, but once again she started doing her sharing thing of holding the food out to us. I was sitting right in front of Emma, and my aunt was sitting on Emma's left side by the kitchen island. Emma's little hands picked up a piece of food and held it out to my aunt. "Oh, thank you, Emma," she said, in that overly enthusiastic way you talk to babies. She took the food from her hand and pretended to eat it. Satisfied, Emma turned to me, picked up another scrap of her food and held it out to me, wanting me to take it. I reached out and grabbed a piece of food out of her messy hand. "Thanks, Emma," I said, and pretended to eat it as well. Then, Emma looked down at her tray and picked up a third piece of food. She turned to her right, towards the open basement door, and stretched out her arm. She was offering the food to the empty doorway, staring into the darkness as if someone was on the basement steps. My aunt saw this too. "Emma, no," she said. "That's too creepy. Don't do that." "Emma, is someone there?" I asked, but we couldn't get her attention. She just stared into the basement and continued to hold out her arm. Eventually, I took the piece of food from her hand. "No, Emma, no, nobody's there." When I took the food, she started crying. Evidently, it had been for someone or something else. I've heard before that some people think children are especially sensitive to the paranormal. With Emma, at least, that hypothesis seemed to be true. My uncle told me another story that occurred when she was very young, still a baby. She slept in a crib in a room across the hallway from my aunt and uncle. They had a baby monitor next to their bed to help keep watch over Emma during the night. She was allegedly a pretty sound sleeper most of the time. One night, however, my uncle woke up to the sound of her laughing. He heard it on the baby monitor plain as day. Emma giggling, punctuated by an occasional belly laugh. My uncle looked over at the clock. It was 2:30 in the morning. He thought it was a little strange that Emma was laughing so loudly for seemingly no reason, so my uncle decided to go and check on her. He got up and walked across the hallway, creaking through the old house every step of the way. As he got to Emma's bedroom door, he could hear her muffled laughing from the other side. My uncle opened the door slowly. Emma's crib was on the far side of the room, near a window that looked out onto the front yard. My uncle rubbed his eyes and saw that Emma was staring at the foot of her crib, and still laughing loudly. He took a few steps into the room and watched for a moment as Emma seemed to stare intently at the foot of her crib, or perhaps even beyond into the dark corner of the room. As my uncle approached the crib, he stepped on a particularly loud floorboard, letting out a deafening creak as the ancient wood squealed beneath his feet. Emma suddenly stopped laughing and turned to look at him, her eyes wide. You okay in here?" my uncle asked. The baby turned back to look wherever she had been before, but this time she didn't laugh. Whoever or whatever it was seemed to be gone. I'll share one last one. In a house with tons of paranormal activity, this story still stands out as one of the more bizarre. It was a few years after the high chair incident, and once again my family and I were visiting over the summer. I forget what the occasion was exactly, but we were having a big barbecue at my aunt and uncle's house. We had some other family that lived close by, and everyone was coming over one evening to grill some burgers and hang out in the yard. I was a bit older now, so I was helping to prepare for the party, bringing tables out from the garage, setting up chairs, helping my uncle with the burgers, and more. Yes, gone were the days of being allowed to just watch SpongeBob while the adults took care of everything. Anyway, I remember it was a beautiful summer night, with fireflies dancing in the yard like little yellow shooting stars. My uncle was on the back porch and asked me to grab the hamburger buns from the kitchen and bring them out to him at the grill. No sooner had I finished this task than he asked me to do something else, to get all of the place settings for the table outside. I sighed, went back into the kitchen and opened the drawer with all the utensils in it. I grabbed a bunch of forks, a bunch of spoons, and... wait, there were no knives. All the knives were gone. I went over to the dishwasher and opened it up. There were a bunch of clean dishes inside, but not a single knife. I grabbed some napkins to go with the forks and spoons and walked back out to my uncle by the grill. The smell of the hamburgers mixing with the summer evening air was intoxicating. "There aren't any knives," I told my uncle. "What? What are you talking about?" "I just ran the dishwasher," my uncle said incredulously. "Well," I replied, "they're not in the dishwasher or the drawer." My uncle called out to my aunt. "Honey, did you empty the knives out of the dishwasher?" My aunt was down where we'd set up the table in the yard, spreading an old red tablecloth across it in preparation for my place settings. "Yes," she called back. "I emptied it earlier. All the utensils should be in the drawer." My uncle looked back at me with his best "I told you so" face, but I stood my ground. "They're not in the drawer. The forks and spoons were, but the knives weren't." My uncle sighed and put down the metal spatula he was flipping the burgers with. "Okay, show me." My uncle followed me back into the kitchen. I led him over to the drawer and showed him the lack of knives. He stared at the drawer for a moment before closing it and checking the others next to it. No knives. He double-checked the dishwasher, checked the drawer again, even did a quick survey of the rest of the kitchen. They were nowhere to be found. Eventually, he gave up, running back to the grill to check on the burgers. I followed him, and he told me that the knives weren't that important for this meal anyway, and that we could get by without them just fine. The rest of the evening was completely normal. My other relatives showed up, and we all ate outside at the big tables on the lawn. The sun set, we lit a few candles, and enjoyed the rural night air. When it eventually came time for the evening to wind down, I helped carry in the dirty plates and clean up the tables and return them to the garage. My parents and I were staying over at the house on this trip, and I was sleeping in a small guest bedroom on the first floor. I was halfway into getting ready to go to sleep when I heard a noise from upstairs. It sounded like a muffled exclamation from my uncle. He called out to me, and I ran upstairs. He had been getting ready to go to sleep as well. When he threw back the covers to get into bed, all of the knives from the drawer were sitting on top of the sheets in a pile. It looked like someone had thrown them onto the bed before remaking it, smoothing the blankets and quilt on top of them so they'd stay hidden. He asked me if I had done it, and as like a joke or something, but I told him no. And from my complete bewilderment, I think he could tell I was serious. We never found out how the knives got into his bed, but my uncle always said that the ghost did it. Oof, there's a few twisted tales of terror for you on this autumn evening. Can you imagine staying in a haunted house like that? Anyone who does, well, I'm not sure they're the sharpest knife in the drawer. Anyway, that's all for now, fellow ghouls. I'm about to go outside and take a look at the phone box. Do come by and see me again sometime soon. Hopefully I'll have the phone fixed and the whole situation with this mysterious intruder figured out. Until then, good night.